All right. Hello, 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 hello. Sean Brady with another fabulous edition and episode to Leverage Your Lunch Hour with the metaphysical mindset. And of course, that means Dr. Laurel Fuller Clark is on board. Dr. Clark, welcome and hello.
Hello. Thanks for being here and thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, thanks again. And just to have it be all complete for those who might have saw Quinlan come on, my youngest son, come in for lunch, wanting a hot dog. Amazingly, he was able to take care of himself. So I went upstairs after our last episode, and he's like, Dad, I don't need anything. I took care of it. And I'm like, well, what did you eat? He's like, a hot dog. So he made it himself, and he put the stuff back in a Tupperware. Well, he said he did. I didn't actually check it, so I have to check that after this episode. But he took care of himself, so there you go.
Very good.
He got what he wanted. Idea to implementation, and he got what he wanted. Pretty cool stuff. So we're taking a deeper dive on implementing our ideas from a metaphysics standpoint. And if this is the first episode you've ever seen or heard on a podcast, on iTunes or on YouTube or wherever it's at, Dr. Laurel Fuller Clark has had an extensive background in metaphysical, not only experiencing it for herself, but actually teaching it for a good 4 decades of her life. So, not only that, she's a well-renowned author, having written many books, and also editing many, many other books. So she's kind of in the know on this metaphysical stuff. So we're talking about universal laws, and what from I've learned so far, and correct me if I'm wrong, the universal laws apply to all of us in all situations, and it's something we can't avoid, just like gravity. We don't have to believe in the law, but we're going to stick to the ground anyway. So Dr. Clark, always thank you for this, and let's talk more and jump right into implementation of ideas, because that's what I think people really want to know. That's what I want to know. I want to know how to implement more of these ideas, and you gave us a great formula last time. So let's jump off from there.
Sure. So the formula is to go from an idea that might be a wish,
Yep.
kind of vague, to a desire, which is clear and more powerful, to a decision, which adds the element of will to the desire, meaning
Right.
I will make this happen. And then from that to a goal, which is more solid and more filled in details than a desire. And then going from the goal to a plan, which is how am I going to make this happen, and then the activity. So one of the things we talked about near the end of the last episode is that if you can be fixed with your goals, then you might need to be flexible with your plans. And knowing the difference between a goal and a plan can be very helpful, because sometimes, unfortunately, people give up on their goals when they need to mutate or be flexible with their plans.
Sure.
And the simple example that happened as we were talking about this is that your son came in wanting lunch. You had already prepared a hamburger that was in the refrigerator, and
Right.
you said, it's there in the refrigerator. And he said, I don't want a hamburger. And you said, well, what do you want? And he said, a hot dog. So you needed to be flexible with your plan about what your son was going to eat. And then he needed to be flexible with his plan, because his original plan is that he would ask you and you would get it for him right then. But you were in the middle of doing a broadcast.
Live.
You told him how he could do it for himself. He said he needed you. Then you said, then you're going to have to wait for 10 minutes.
Right.
So he needed to be flexible with his plan. And as it turned out, he discovered he could make it for himself.
Right.
So he was able to have what he wanted. You were able to have what you wanted. And those came together because both of you were willing to be flexible with your plans. So an alternative scenario that did not happen is you could have said, I'm not going to be flexible with my plan. If you want to eat, you get a hamburger, or otherwise you don't get to eat.
Right.
You didn't do that. You said, if you want to eat right now, this is what's ready for you right now, or you can make it yourself, or you can wait three options of what he could do. He could have done any number of things, like thrown a temper tantrum, and instead of going away and saying, okay, I'll wait 10 minutes. And in the time that he went away, he learned something new about his ability to make it for himself. So I think this is a really good example because it shows how the willingness and the ability to be flexible with the how-to is a key element in being able to implement our ideas instead of just getting stuck because we don't know what to do or what we thought we were going to do didn't work. And as I was saying in the last episode, sometimes when we need to change our plans, some people say, oh, well, I guess it wasn't meant to be. You know, if it's meant to be, it's going to be easy. If you have to put out effort,
that's
then
right.
And that's just not true. I mean, most things in the world, we need to put out some effort to make them happen.
Right. Yeah, it's in the subject of money, another one of my topics that I love to talk about. I remember someone, it's like, oh, well, I need money to do this. I need money to do that. And it's just like, I can't get any. I'm like, well, what are you willing to do for it? He's like, well, I can ask people. And I'm like, okay. And he's like, okay, can I have $10,000? I'm like, well, maybe, for what? And he's like, well, see, you didn't give me any. And I'm like, well, I'm not just going to give you the money for, I don't know, you didn't have a plan. You didn't show me anything. You didn't, you're not showing anybody your abilities or what you're going to exchange that value for, and, to compensate for that amount. And just really neat stuff. So how would we take this, how would we implement our idea if, there's a lot of people who are like, they're on the fence about starting a business, or maybe make an investment, or, do something major in their life, a life choice. How can they begin to implement that thing and know it's really there? Because I think that's where the indecision comes from, is like a not knowing. And, in the very beginning, and I'm referring back to my notes from the previous episode, it's not just attention for our ideas, but giving our ideas undivided and focused attention.
Right. So let's take the example of writing a book. Because as you said in your introduction, I've had 7 books that I've written be published.
Right.
The very first book that I wrote wasn't published. Actually, when I think about it, I wrote a children's book when I was in college that wasn't published.
Right.
And I wrote a book for adults about friendship that wasn't published. However, there are books that I wrote, and then I have 7 books that I have written and published, and I've contributed to maybe a dozen more where I've written chapters that are in collected essays that have been published. I have dozens, maybe even hundreds of published articles. So how did I go from ideas about writing, desires to write, to actually having things that got published?
Right.
And so part of it, a big part of it, is experience. So I love to read, and I used to keep journals. I used to write poetry when I was a kid. I took classes when I was in high school and college that required essay exams or papers to write instead of memorizing things for multiple choice exams. When I was in college, I was very deliberate about choosing classes where most of the testing was writing rather than multiple choice exams. So I got experience. And back in the old days, before computers and email,
Right.
I used to write lots of letters. So I wrote handwritten letters. I don't remember when I started keeping journals, but I did that for a long time. So the point is that I had lots of experience writing. Now, to go from experience writing writing
published.
that can be published.
Right.
Some of that I got from submitting articles to magazines and getting feedback. Some of it, a lot of it came from reading articles with a critical eye and reading books with a critical eye to see what was the difference. Why
Sure.
is this book considered a classic and this book isn't? Why is this book considered a classic that I thought was really boring, and this book that's considered a classic I couldn't put down? Because there's all different kinds of writing and there's all different kinds of authors. So learning how to learn through observation was a part of it. And I read books about writing. There are writers, like Stephen King has an excellent book that's called On Writing.
Right.
It's a small little book. So I read books by authors about writing, and I took English classes. So I did lots of different things beyond my own desire to write, to get experience and to gain knowledge, and then to put that into practice and to be willing to submit things for publication, and instead of giving up at the first rejection, to be willing to keep submitting things. So I think in terms of somebody who wants a business, whatever it is, finding someone who can be a teacher or a mentor, like someone who has themselves successfully developed businesses, or even people who have tried to start businesses and haven't, who are willing to talk about what they see was the reason for that. What was a lesson that I didn't learn? What was something I could have done better or differently? So, and then being willing to get some experience. One thing that I am really an advocate of, back in the feudal days, people would be an apprentice if they wanted to be a weaver, they wanted to be a whatever, blacksmith.
Right.
They would apprentice with somebody who was an expert. And I still think that's a really good model. So if somebody wants to have a real estate business, if they can find somebody who's a successful realtor and say, can I shadow you? I know some people who are being ordained as ministers this coming weekend, and part of their training for ministry was to shadow chaplains. One at a hospital, one in hospice. They chose the chaplain that had a similar occupation that they were interested in, and they spent a period of time by shadowing. They went with the chaplain as the chaplain was doing their duties, so they got a chance to see and hear and sometimes even participate in the different activities. And I don't know if they still do it, but there used to be something that was like a day where you take your daughter to work, and I think they had to take your son to work. That the idea being that the child would go with their parent to work so they could be in that environment, and what does dad do for a living and how does he do it?
Right.
So if you can either volunteer your time or find somebody that you can apprentice with and you're willing to invest that time without getting paid, I think that's an excellent way to, without having to risk anything other than your time, to see what's involved. Is this something that I really want, and is it something that I'm willing to do in order to have what I want? Unlike your friend that said, here, just give me $10,000.
Well, it wasn't necessarily a friend. It was just an acquaintance, but I thought that was a neat... I just always remember that. I don't remember the person's name. I just remember the situation because I'm like, well, who's going to give you anything if you're not providing anything in exchange, or if you're not going to put forth the effort? Why would you expect the result of that? It's I think it was Gandhi who said it was it's one of the greatest myths in the world is wealth without work. It's kind of crazy, but And then you had me think of another thing where you mentioned real estate, and I used to be a realtor. I used to do commercial real estate, and I did some residential as well. And I thought it was, of course, after doing it for 5 or 6 or 7 years. we were sitting in like some sort of training session for whatever it was, but the idea is like, oh, if you were new to the business, what a great idea to not even before becoming a realtor, work in a real estate office, actually get paid to do it as an assistant, because everybody needs an assistant. If they're getting better at real estate, they need help, and they will pay you to do that. But then the golden thing is that if you just do that for 6 months, you see who's really successful in the office, who's not so successful, what the best practices are, where people fall short, even if they're really good. And then you can conduct and figure out how you want to do your business, or if you even want to be in that profession. And instead of just apprenticing for nothing, you were actually earning money, but you were really earning knowledge along the way that was beneficial, whether you stayed in real estate or not.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect example. And I think that, unfortunately, there are people, and it's not just young people, it can be of any age, who are very talented and creative, who have the illusion or maybe delusion that they should only get paid for their most creative, fulfilling fantasies. And at that point, I'd say fantasy because they don't have experience. Instead of saying, you know what, I'm willing to get paid to be a secretary in this office, even though maybe I think I could do better at running it than my boss. Well, I don't have the experience to do that, so I'm willing to be a secretary. And as you're saying, then I can learn about the business, and I can maybe pick this person's brain, or maybe by getting to know them and being willing to be the best secretary, they grow to know me and how responsible I am. And so then later on, they'll refer me. You know, there's all kinds of ways that willingness to get experience and to make money to take care of everyday needs is very important and helpful, because I think we talked about this in a previous episode of Metaphysical Mindset. If you don't even know where your next meal is going to come from, that's not a very good state of mind to be able to do some of the things that you would prefer to do.
Yes.
And many people who are successful tell stories about in the early days, like authors who became successful. They worked at a job during the day, and then they wrote their novel at night, or they got up at 4 o'clock in the morning to write an hour a day before going into work, or whatever it is that they needed to do, because it was important enough to them to do that, instead of saying, oh, I need to wait until I have a sabbatical to write, or I need to wait until I have a week off of work and I have a vacation. Because most people who do that, where they're waiting to fulfill a desire instead of working in some way toward fulfilling the desire, when they have the extra time, they don't do it anyway. So getting any kind of experience is part of not only building a sense of self-value, but building the knowledge and the experience to then be able to take the next step to maybe now I can do my own business.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that experience could be anywhere. I think of, it could be a very repetitive job, but, all of a sudden, I think of my wife's family has a lot of welders, and they have a welding business. And, all of a sudden you just, you start off and you're going to the job and going year after year, and it's like, yeah, you're making, your money providing for your household, but then all of a sudden you're a master welder and you can teach other people these skills. And it's like, oh yeah, you're actually a go-to expert around these things. Or, it could be any walk of life, from medicine to real estate to, my other buddy has a glass company. And it's just amazing where you have that constant practice and repetition that grows your experience. And then you're all of a sudden a sought-after expert. It's like, it didn't happen overnight, but, the old joke is, oh yeah, it only took me 20 years to become an overnight success.
Exactly. And process. So I know when I was first looking for jobs other than tutoring or babysitting, I thought, because I was really shy in my younger years, that I wanted to work in a small office, like a one-person office. And so I got jobs like that. I got a job as a secretary to someone who was, his company, he worked out of his office. It was just him and me. I got another job like that where I was the secretary for someone who was in charge of the sales staff, but none of the meetings were in the office. She met with them somewhere else. And I had a couple other jobs like that. And I found myself getting very tired, like not even working that many hours, and just depleted. And then I moved and applied at a temporary agency, and I got a job doing similar work, file clerk, receptionist type stuff in a big company. And I was so uneasy about going in there because I thought, I don't want to work for a big company. And what I found out was I loved being in a big company. That even though I was shy, I really liked people. And there was something about being the receptionist where I could say hello to everybody who walked in the door. It was energizing, and it made me feel good. And I would start looking forward to seeing these people, even though I didn't really build relationships with them because I wasn't working with them. I just enjoyed being there. And so for me, it was a matter of changing my perception of myself from thinking that I wanted to be by myself to realizing I actually do better when there are other people I can engage with.
Right.
I think that it's really helpful to have that kind of open-mindedness with ourselves of realizing, okay, I don't even really know all of what I need to do to start this business, so I'll get a job as an assistant in a real estate company, and I'll use it to learn, not just about being an assistant, but what the real estate business is all about. And maybe I can take my boss out to lunch and ask him some questions about what he did to build his business, or whatever it might be, that we use it as a learning process.
Absolutely. So two things. One, it makes me think of a big shout out for Medici Media Space for always being in our corner and providing the wonderful Jaleesa Powell in the background, who's our cool media coordinator. What they do is take on a co-working type space and atmosphere, not just a physical space, but also a sharing economy and community, business community that helps us all, further our own endeavors. So big shout out for Medici Media Space, MediciSTL.com for those listening on a podcast that might not see it in the show notes. One thing I wanted to emphasize or highlight was this is all very personal to everyone. So taking our ideas and implementation, you could follow someone else's footsteps and, do exactly what they do. But as my hashtag over my shoulder says, it's be more you. And all this stuff, just like finance, it's personal. It's personal finance. Well, it's personal everything, from, the way nutrition works in our bodies to the relationships we want to have to the things that we enjoy, to being, like you said, creativity. You were always a writer, and then you went from that to a published author, but there was always writing in your background. For me, I do not love writing the way you probably do. I like it, but it's not at the same level. And again, it's that whole personal endeavor or personal joy or specific to oneself, an individual, that allows this implementation to really come through. There's no necessary wrong way to do it. Maybe I'm speaking out of turn, but hopefully that's correct.
Right, I agree with you on that. And actually, with your shout out to Medici, looking at the time, we're about ready for Coaches Corner.
Oh my gosh.
So, for all of us who are coaches or want to be coaches, I think that what you just said is what any good coach can do is to help someone discover how they can be more you.
Yep.
What is it that you resonate with, and how can you do that most completely? So if people are watching this
Yeah, easy place to find that. In case you don't have the link, we'll put it in the show notes for future. But just simply go to MediciSTL.com. Medici is MEDICI. STL for St. Louis.com. And then if you do /events, you'll be able to find a whole list of different strategy sessions. And every Thursday at 1:30 Central Standard Time, we have our Coach's Corner at 1:30 to 3. So that's where Laurel and I are going to go right now. Dr. Clark, thank you. Always fabulous. Metaphysical mindset, digging it. Jaleesa in the background, thank you. Ready to roll that bumper?
Yes.
All right. Dr. Clark, anything else for you before we sign off?
Just thank you, Sean Brady, for being more you. I really appreciate you and all of your talents and enthusiasm.
Well, thank you. We love this. We love getting the enthusiasm because this interaction drives me. It's better than caffeine. All right, everybody. Jaleesa, thank you for all your participation and making us stay on point. And for everybody else out there, we may not see you in person, but we're always going to see you right here on social media. Thanks for watching YouTube and listen to podcasts wherever you get your podcasts. Sean Brady, thank you.
Okay, we're on.
All right.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Thanks, Jaleesa.
No problem. So in the beginning, when I didn't click the intro reel in the beginning, it was because I didn't have